June 15, 1943. The Russian summer is nothing like back home in Munich. Here, the sun is a relentless oppressor, its heat unyielding as we march across these vast plains. Dust rises with each step we take, sticking to our skin, already slick with sweat. I can see the strain on the faces of my comrades. Johann, a young recruit from Dresden, keeps a brave front, but I notice his hands tremble every time we ready our rifles. He's barely 18, a kid thrown into a nightmare. I try to offer him a reassuring nod, remembering my own fears when I first joined. Our squad leader, Lieutenant Weber, is a man of few words. His eyes have seen too much, yet he carries an air of unspoken resolve. We all look up to him, drawing strength from his steady presence. Last night he confided in me about his concerns for the days ahead. "This war takes more from us than just blood," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Today we encountered a deserted village. The silence was haunting, broken only by the occasional creak of a swinging signboard. Abandoned homes, once filled with life, now stood as hollow shells. In one of the houses I found a small hand-carved wooden toy on the floor. It was a stark reminder of the innocent lives disrupted by this war. As night falls, we set camp. The heat lingers, making sleep elusive. Around the fire, the men talk in hushed tones about home, about loved ones. I find myself lost in thoughts of my own family, wondering how they are, if they think of me. Tomorrow, we march towards an uncertain objective. Rumours of a skirmish ahead have been circulating. In the quiet of the night, I brace myself for what's to come. In this endless expanse of Russian terrain, each day is a battle against more than just the enemy. It's a fight for our very souls. June 17, 1943. The dawn broke with a crimson hue, casting long shadows across the Russian plains. The relentless heat seems to grow with each passing day, making our journey more arduous. The men trudge forward, their faces set in grim determination, their uniforms stained with the evidence of their toil. Johann, the young recruit, stays close to me. His initial fear has been replaced by a quiet resolve, a transformation born out of necessity rather than choice. During our brief rests, he often asks about life back in Germany, clinging to tales of normalcy as if they were a lifeline. Lieutenant Weber seems more pensive these days. Last night, as we gathered around a small fire, he spoke of his family in Hamburg. "I wonder if my daughter still remembers me," he said with a distant look in his eyes. His vulnerability, rarely shown, brought a solemn understanding among us. Today, we heard the distant rumblings of artillery. The sound, both ominous and familiar, served as a stark reminder of our reality. We are moving closer to the heart of conflict, each step taking us further from who we once were. Encountering a bombed-out convoy was a sobering sight. Charred remains of trucks and men alike lay scattered, a haunting tableau of war's indiscriminate nature. It was a silent march past the wreckage, each of us lost in our own reflections on the fragility of life. Tonight, as I write, the air is heavy with anticipation and apprehension. The men try to rest, but sleep is elusive under the weight of the unknown. Our conversations have dwindled. Even the comfort of shared memories seems a luxury too distant to indulge in now. June 19, 1943. As the sun ascends once again over the vast Russian terrain, its rays bring little warmth to our weary souls. The land stretches endlessly, a tapestry of scorched earth and bleak horizons. With each step forward, the weight of our gear seems to grow heavier, as if absorbing the sorrow of this land. Johann has grown quiet over the past days. The realities of war are etching themselves into his youthful features, adding years to his face that time alone should not have done. During our scarce moments of rest, he stares into the distance, his eyes reflecting a world forever changed. Lieutenant Weber remains our steadfast leader, his resolve unbroken despite the growing fatigue that grips us all. In his steady gaze, there is an unspoken promise to guide us through whatever lies ahead. Last night he spoke of the importance of holding on to our humanity amidst the chaos. "It's all that separates us from the abyss," he said solemnly. The distant thunder of artillery is now a constant backdrop to our march. Each explosion is a jarring reminder of the imminent danger we are walking towards. The tension among the men is palpable, a mix of fear, determination, and an unyielding sense of duty. Today we passed a field hospital. The sights and sounds of the wounded were harrowing, a stark testament to the cruel reality of war. The medical staff worked tirelessly, their faces marked with exhaustion and resolve. It was a brief yet poignant reminder of the fragility of life. Tonight the camp is quiet. Men lay in restless slumber, haunted by the day's events and the uncertainty of tomorrow. I find solace in writing these words, a small beacon of light in the enveloping darkness. The dawn of June 20th arrived with an eerie calm, a deceptive tranquility that belied the bloodshed that was to unfold. The Russian sky, a vast expanse of blue, watched silently as we prepared for the battle ahead. The tension was thick as we received our final orders. Johann, his face now a mask of stoic resolve, loaded his rifle with trembling hands. Lieutenant Weber, his usual composed self, gave us a brief nod, his way of imparting courage without words. As we advanced, the silence was shattered by the first shots of the enemy. What followed was a maelstrom of chaos and violence. Gunfire and explosions filled the air, a cacophony of death that drowned out all thoughts but survival. The battle was relentless. We moved as one, a machine of war, yet each step was a struggle against fear and exhaustion. I found myself beside Johann, firing at shadowy figures through the smoke and dust. His earlier fear had transformed into fierce determination. The air was thick with the stench of gunpowder and blood. Screams of the wounded and dying echoed around us, a haunting chorus to the symphony of war. I saw men fall, their lives extinguished in an instant, and with each one a part of me wilted. Lieutenant Weber was a force unto himself, rallying the men, his voice cutting through the din of battle. But then, in a fleeting moment, he fell. I saw him stumble and knew instantly that we had lost more than just a leader. As the day wore on, the fighting grew more intense, if that was even possible. We were pushed to our limits, every sense heightened, every emotion amplified. The field became a landscape of destruction, littered with the remnants of what once were men. As night fell, the battle waned, leaving behind a deafening silence. We retreated, carrying our wounded, leaving behind a scene of devastation. Johann was silent as we walked back, his eyes haunted, reflecting a scene that would forever be etched in our memories. The cost of this war is immeasurable, counted not just in bodies but in the shattered spirits of those who survive. In this vast Russian land, we are reminded of the fragility of life and the harrowing cost of conflict. The war continues, but for many of us, something fundamental has changed within. In the aftermath of yesterday's battle, the world seems a different place. The sun rose again, indifferent to the tragedy that unfolded beneath its gaze. The fields, once a picturesque expanse, are now marred with the scars of war, a haunting testament to the brutality of the previous day. The air is heavy with a sombre quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos that reigned just hours ago. The men are subdued, their movements mechanical, as if they are trying to piece together their shattered selves. Johann's eyes have lost their youthful glimmer. They now hold a depth of pain and understanding far beyond his years. The loss of Lieutenant Weber has left a palpable void. He was more than just our commanding officer. He was our anchor in the storm of war. In his absence, a sense of aimlessness pervades, a rudderless feeling that is hard to shake off. We spent the day tending to the wounded and gathering the fallen. The task is grim, but necessary. Each body we recover, each comrade we lay to rest, is a silent reminder of the cost of this conflict. The finality of death amidst the ongoing battle is a jarring reality we are forced to face. As I sit here tonight, writing by the dim light of a lantern, the images of the day replay in my mind. The sound of gunfire, the cries of the wounded, the determined look in Johann's eyes as he fought. They all blend into a surreal memory that I struggle to comprehend. June 22nd, 1943. Today dawned with an unexpected turn of events. The morning was crisp, a slight respite from the relentless heat, as we received word of an impending enemy offensive. Our depleted unit, still reeling from the losses of the recent battle, had to mobilize quickly. Johann, despite his haunted look from the previous days, stepped up remarkably. He took charge of organizing our ammunition, his actions decisive, a clear shift from the hesitant boy I first knew. His transformation, under such dire circumstances, was both impressive and heartbreaking. Mid-morning, the distant rumble of tanks broke the silence, a harbinger of the impending chaos. We braced ourselves, trenches our only shield against the onslaught. The earth shook as the enemy's armoured units advanced. I gripped my rifle, memories of yesterday's horror fresh in my mind. Then the unexpected happened. Our air support, which we thought was days away, roared above us. The sound of our planes was like a mighty thunder, a morale boost that was desperately needed. The tide of the battle shifted visibly as they engaged the enemy tanks, their bombs creating massive explosions that lit up the battlefield. In that moment, something within us reignited. Energized by the support, we fought with renewed vigor. Johann was beside me, firing with a steady hand, shouting over the din. Our unit, inspired by his bravery, rallied and pushed forward, driving back the enemy with a ferocity born of desperation and newfound hope. As the battle wore on, we managed to reclaim ground we had lost days before. The sight of the enemy retreating was one I'll never forget. It was a rare moment of triumph in a landscape so often filled with despair. Tonight, the camp is alive with a buzz of victory, albeit a temporary one. We know this war is far from over, but today's success has given us something invaluable: hope. Johann, now seen as a young hero among the men, wears his newfound respect with a quiet dignity. June 23, 1943. This morning arrived with an unusual sense of calm, a stark contrast to the adrenaline-fueled chaos of the previous day. The victory, though minor in the grand scheme of the war, had given us a much-needed morale boost. Today, however, was to be marked not by the sound of gunfire, but by the simpler yet profound act of sharing a meal together. The day's relative peace allowed for a rare opportunity, a proper meal. Our rations, usually consumed hastily and under the constant threat of enemy fire, could today be savoured with a semblance of normalcy. The cooks outdid themselves, preparing a stew that, while far from gourmet, was a veritable feast in our current conditions. As we gathered around the makeshift dining area, there was an air of camaraderie that had been missing in the previous weeks of relentless fighting. Johann, the newly minted hero of our unit, was at the centre of it all, his spirits visibly lifted. He joked and laughed, the sound of his laughter a balm to our weary souls. Even in the midst of war, the simple act of eating together, of sharing stories and laughter, served as a powerful reminder of our humanity. For a brief moment, we were not just soldiers in a war-torn land. We were comrades, friends, sharing a meal and forging memories. The conversation turned to memories of home. Each man had a story, a fragment of a life put on hold. We talked of family meals, of favourite dishes, of the small everyday moments that we missed. In sharing these memories, we found a common ground, a connection that went beyond the uniforms we wore and the weapons we carried. As the day drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on the importance of such moments. In the vastness of the Russian plains, amidst the horrors of war, these instances of normalcy, of laughter and shared meals, are what keep our spirits alive. June 24, 1943. The brief respite we enjoyed was shattered early in the morning. The distant sound of artillery announced the beginning of another long day on the front. As we scrambled to our positions, the camaraderie of yesterday's meal seemed like a distant memory. The first battle of the day was intense. We were tasked with holding a strategic point, and the enemy was determined to break through. Johann, now a figure of inspiration for the men, fought valiantly. His bravery under fire was remarkable, rallying the others even when the situation seemed dire. In the midst of the chaos, I noticed a young soldier, barely out of his teens, frozen in fear. I saw myself in him, the same fear I had felt when I first arrived on the front. I grabbed him by the shoulder, guiding him to cover, shouting words of encouragement. In that moment, I realized how much I had changed, how the war had hardened me. The battle raged on for hours, and when it finally subsided, we were left with the grim task of tending to the wounded and collecting the fallen. The cost of war was written on the faces of every man in the unit. June 25th, 1943. Today brought new challenges. We were ordered to advance and take a small village held by the enemy. The march there was tense, every step filled with anticipation. As we approached the village, we were met with fierce resistance. The fight was brutal, house-to-house combat that tested the limits of our endurance and will. In these close quarters, the faces of the enemy were clear and distinct, young men not unlike ourselves, caught in the gears of a war much larger than any of us. Johann was a force to be reckoned with, moving through the village with a mix of fearlessness and tactical acumen. His actions saved several of our men when an enemy ambush nearly caught us off guard. By nightfall we had secured the village, but the victory was bittersweet. The toll of the day's fight was evident in the weary and haunted looks of my comrades. June 26, 1943. The third day was marked by an unexpected turn. As we prepared to fend off a counterattack, word came of a temporary ceasefire. The sudden halt of gunfire was surreal, an almost uncomfortable silence after days of constant noise. During this brief ceasefire, we encountered some of the enemy soldiers. Up close, the animosity of war gave way to a shared sense of exhaustion. We exchanged cigarettes and food in a tentative gesture of humanity, a stark contrast to the previous day's violence. Johann, usually a man of action, was quiet during these exchanges. I could see him processing this moment, the realization that the men we fought against were just that, men not so different from us. As we returned to our positions, the ceasefire ended, and the reality of war descended upon us once again. The brief moment of peace was a poignant reminder of what we all longed for, an end to the fighting. The past 3 days have been a microcosm of this war, intense battles, fleeting moments of humanity, and the unrelenting push forward. We have become more than just soldiers. We are survivors, each carrying our own stories of bravery, fear, and hope. As we prepare for what comes next, these experiences bind us together, a band of brothers forged in the fires of conflict. June 27th, 1943. The dawn of today brought a rare gift, a day of rest and recovery. After the relentless battles and constant vigilance of the past few days, this respite feels almost surreal, like a brief exhale in the midst of a storm. The morning was unusually quiet, the usual sounds of artillery and orders replaced by the soft murmur of men speaking and the distant chirping of birds. I woke up to the sun filtering through the canvas of the tent, casting a warm glow that felt comforting. As I lay there for a few moments, I allowed myself the luxury of closing my eyes and just breathing. The tension in my muscles, built up over days of fighting, slowly began to ease. It's in these quiet moments that the reality of our situation sinks in. We are living in a constant state of alertness, always ready for the next call to arms. Breakfast was a simple affair, but today it had a different feel. There was no rush, no urgency to gulp down the food and move out. We ate slowly, savouring each bite, talking about things other than the war. Johann, sitting across from me, shared stories about his hometown, his family's bakery, and the pastries they made. His eyes lit up as he described them, and for a moment he was not a soldier in a war-torn land, but a young man reminiscing about the comforts of home. The day progressed slowly. Some of the men played cards, others wrote letters home. I spent a good part of the morning cleaning my rifle and checking my equipment. There's a kind of meditation in these mundane tasks, a way to bring order to the chaos that surrounds us. In the afternoon, a few of us took a short walk around the camp's perimeter. The landscape, though scarred by the recent fighting, still holds a certain rugged beauty. The vastness of the Russian plains is both daunting and awe-inspiring. It's easy to feel insignificant in such an immense space, yet there's also a sense of being part of something much larger than oneself. As evening approaches, the camp starts to settle down. Dinner is a quiet affair, the conversations more reflective. We talk about our hopes for the future, what we'll do when the war is over. Some dream of returning to their old jobs, others of starting anew. Johann speaks of going back to his family's bakery, of creating a life far removed from the horrors of war. As I write this, the camp is bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The men are gathering for a small bonfire. There's a guitar somewhere, and soon its melodies fill the air. It's moments like these that remind us of our humanity, of the world beyond the battlefield. We may be called back to the front, but for today we had a chance to rest, to heal, if only a little. These moments of peace are fleeting, yet they are essential. They remind us of what we're fighting for, not just for victory, but for the chance to return to a normal life, to reclaim the joys and simplicities that war has taken from us. June 28, 1943. This morning, our unit was assigned to a reconnaissance mission in a nearby Russian village. The objective was straightforward: assess the area for enemy activity and gather any useful intelligence. However, what transpired was something I could never have anticipated. As we entered the village, I was struck by its eerie silence. The war had clearly touched this place, leaving behind empty streets and a haunting sense of abandonment. We moved cautiously, alert for any signs of danger. It was then that I saw her. Amidst the desolation, there was a young Russian woman standing in front of a war-damaged house. She was like a vision, a stark contrast to the ruin around her. She had long, dark hair that fell in waves over her shoulders, and her eyes, a deep shade of blue, held a look of defiance mixed with a profound sadness. I couldn't help but be captivated by her. There was a grace about her, even in the midst of such devastation. She seemed to be guarding the house, perhaps what remained of her family's home. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and in that instant I felt a connection, a sense of understanding that transcended the barriers of language and war. I approached her cautiously, aware of the rifle slung over my shoulder and the uniform I wore, symbols of her enemy. But she didn't flee. Instead, she held my gaze, her expression unreadable. I attempted a few words in broken Russian, a language I had picked up a little during our campaign. She replied softly, her voice carrying a melodic tone that resonated within me. We couldn't talk much. The language barrier and the presence of my unit made sure of that. But in those few exchanged words, I felt a stirring of something I hadn't expected to find in this desolate place. A sense of connection, a fleeting moment of peace amidst the chaos of war. As we left the village, I found myself looking back, hoping to catch one more glimpse of her. The image of her standing there, a solitary figure against the backdrop of her war-torn home, will stay with me. June 29, 1943. Today's journey was a stark reminder of the unforgiving nature of this land and this war. We left the village at dawn, the image of the Russian girl still vivid in my mind. But soon, the harsh realities of our mission reclaimed my focus. The terrain ahead was daunting. Heavy rains from the previous night had transformed the landscape into a treacherous quagmire. Each step was a battle against the clinging mud, a thick, relentless mass that seemed determined to pull us into its depths. The overcast sky hung low, a leaden canopy that mirrored our sombre mood. Our progress was painfully slow. The weight of our equipment, already burdensome, became nearly unbearable as it was laden with mud. We struggled to maintain our footing, the earth itself seeming to rise against us. The men's faces were etched with exhaustion, their eyes hollow from the strain. Johann trudged beside me, his usual resilience dampened by the grueling conditions. His youthful vigour, so apparent in the battles, was now subdued by the relentless, miring journey. We exchanged no words, the effort of moving forward consuming all our energy. As the day wore on, the rain resumed, a steady downpour that turned the landscape into a morass of despair. The water streamed down our helmets and soaked through our uniforms, chilling us to the bone. The sound of raindrops pelting against the metal and fabric was a constant, maddening drumbeat, accompanying our every step. The terrain became increasingly difficult as we navigated through what seemed like an endless expanse of mud and water-filled craters. At one point, a comrade slipped and fell, his body disappearing momentarily into a muddy pool. We rushed to his aid, pulling him out with great effort. He emerged, gasping and covered in mud, a living embodiment of our struggle. As night approaches, we have set up a makeshift camp. The men are silent, their energy spent, their spirits weighed down by the day's ordeal. We huddle together, seeking warmth and comfort in our shared misery. Tomorrow promises more of the same, more mud, more rain, more relentless marching. But tonight, as I write, I find a strange solace in the solidarity of my comrades. In the face of such harsh conditions, our resolve is tested but not broken. We are united in our struggle, bound by the shared goal of surviving this harsh landscape and the war that has brought us here. June 30th, 1943. The breaking of dawn brought no relief from our trials. The relentless rain had turned the world around us into a monochrome of grey, a bleak landscape that matched the mood of the men. We broke camp with heavy hearts, the prospect of another day wading through this morass weighing heavily on us. The journey resumed, more arduous than before. The mud seemed to have a life of its own, sucking at our boots with each step, as if trying to swallow us whole. The rain continued to pour, a relentless deluge that soaked through every layer, chilling us to the bone. Johann's usually stoic demeanour was beginning to crack under the strain. I caught him several times, staring blankly into the distance, his face a mask of fatigue and despair. The hardships of the past days were taking their toll on all of us, but on him the change was most pronounced. As we trudged through this desolate expanse, a sense of isolation enveloped us. It felt as though we were the only souls in a forgotten world, abandoned by both man and nature. The occasional sound of distant artillery fire was a grim reminder that the war was still raging, despite our current struggle against the elements. At midday, we reached a swollen river, its waters raging from the recent downpours. The crossing was perilous, the current strong and unforgiving. We linked arms, forming a human chain for stability, as we waded through the icy torrent. The fear in each man's eyes was palpable, a stark reminder of the fragility of our existence in the face of nature's power. By late afternoon, we had barely covered any significant distance. Exhausted, we found a slightly elevated ground to set up a temporary camp. The men collapsed, too tired to speak, their faces etched with the trials of the day. As I sit here, writing by the dim light of a lantern, the rain continues to fall outside. The sound, once a soothing rhythm, now feels like an endless dirge. We are trapped in a cycle of endurance, each day a test of our will to keep moving forward. July 2nd, 1943. As July unfolds, the relentless march through the sodden Russian landscape continues. The persistent rain has become our constant companion, a reminder of the ongoing struggle not just against the enemy, but against the very elements themselves. Today, however, brought a brief respite from the physical challenges we face. As we halted for a short break, a field post delivery arrived, a rare connection to the world beyond this war-torn land. Among the assortment of letters and packages, to my utter surprise, was a letter addressed to me. The handwriting was unmistakably my father's, the familiar script a link to a life that seems now like a distant dream. With trembling hands and an anxious heart, I opened the letter. The words within were a balm to my weary soul. My father spoke of home, of the mundane yet precious details of daily life that I long for. He wrote of my mother's garden, how the roses were in full bloom, painting a vivid picture of colours and scents that I could almost perceive through his words. He shared news of my younger sister, now excelling in her studies, her determination undimmed by the war's shadow. My father's pride in her achievements was evident, and for a moment I felt a surge of joy amidst the gloom of my surroundings. But it was his words of encouragement and love that struck me the most. He spoke of his unwavering belief in me, his hope for my safe return. "You are always in our thoughts every day, every hour," he wrote. "Your courage and strength give us hope. Stay safe, my son. We await the day when we can embrace you once more." As I finished reading, my eyes blurred with unshed tears. The letter was a reminder of all that I fight for, all that I hope to return to. In the midst of this desolate and unforgiving terrain, The words of my father were a light piercing through the darkness, a reminder of the love and life that await me. I shared some of the news with Johann, who listened intently, a soft smile playing on his lips. For a moment we were not soldiers in a distant land, but young men connected to our families, our homes, our past lives. July 3rd, 1943. The day was marked by the monotony that often accompanies long stretches at the front. The landscape around us remained unchanged, the vast Russian plains stretching endlessly under a sky that mirrored our sombre mood. However, it was during these dull moments that an insightful conversation unfolded amongst us. As we took a brief rest, Johann and I found ourselves in the company of a few other soldiers, huddled together for warmth and camaraderie. The conversation started with the usual topics: the weather, the condition of our equipment, and speculations about the war's progress. But it wasn't long before it delved into something deeper. It began with Johann asking about the letter I received. I shared more details about my family, which seemed to open a door for others to express their own thoughts and feelings. One of our comrades, a sturdy man named Müller, spoke of his wife and newborn daughter, whom he had yet to meet. His eyes softened as he talked about them, a stark contrast to his usually tough demeanour. Then there was Lucas, a young soldier who had joined us recently. He shared his dreams of becoming a teacher after the war, his passion for education and making a difference evident in his enthusiastic tone. His optimism seemed almost out of place in our current setting, yet it was refreshing, a reminder of the hopes and aspirations we all carried. As the conversation continued, we found ourselves discussing not just our personal lives, but our views on the war and what the future might hold. There was a sense of uncertainty, but also a shared determination to make it through, to return to the lives and dreams we had put on hold. Johann, usually more reserved, opened up about his fears and his longing for the simplicity of his hometown. His vulnerability in that moment brought us closer, breaking down the invisible barriers that hardship and war often build. The discussion eventually wound down as we were called back to duty, but the sense of connection lingered. In the midst of the war, these conversations are vital. They remind us that we are not just soldiers. We are individuals with rich inner lives, connected by common experiences and shared humanity. July 4th, 1943. Yesterday, the day was spent mainly in routine tasks, maintaining equipment, fortifying our position, and conducting standard patrols. The sameness of these activities offers little to write about, yet there's a comfort in the predictability, a brief respite from the unpredictability of battle. In the evening, we gathered around a small fire, the flickering flames casting shadows on the faces of my comrades. The conversation was sparse, mostly revolving around mundane topics. There's a sense of waiting, a collective holding of breath for what's to come, yet also an unspoken appreciation for these moments of peace. July 5th, 1943. Today was much like the previous one. The sky was overcast, a fitting backdrop to the grey mood among the men. We received a supply drop, which included letters and packages from home for some. Watching the faces of my fellow soldiers light up as they read words from loved ones was a poignant reminder of the world outside this war-torn landscape. Johann, who hadn't received any mail, tried to hide his disappointment. I sat with him for a while, sharing stories and words of encouragement. We spoke of what we missed most about home, our families, and the simple pleasures of civilian life. A cup of coffee at a favourite cafe, a walk in the park, the laughter of loved ones. As the day drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on the strange nature of war, how it can be filled with intense periods of action and fear, yet also these stretches of inactivity, where time seems to stretch on indefinitely. In these quiet times, the mind wanders, often to the life left behind, to hopes for the future. July 6th, 1943. The eerie calm that had enveloped us for the past few days was brutally shattered this morning. At the break of dawn, while the world was still cloaked in the dim light of early morning, we were jolted awake by the sudden, ferocious onslaught of a Soviet attack. It began with the distant, growing rumble of artillery, a sound that has become all too familiar. But this time it was different. closer, more intense, a clear indication that we were the target. Within moments, the entire camp was in chaos, as every man scrambled to his feet, grabbing weapons and preparing for the imminent battle. The first shells landed with deafening roars, shaking the ground beneath us, sending plumes of earth and smoke into the air. The sky, which only moments ago was a soft canvas of dawn hues, was now streaked with the trails of incoming fire. Johann and I found ourselves side by side, our rifles at the ready, as we sought cover behind what little protection our position offered. The air was filled with the cacophony of explosions, gunfire, and the shouts of men. Fear and adrenaline surged through me, a potent mix that heightened every sense. The Soviets advanced swiftly, their numbers overwhelming. They emerged like spectres out of the morning mist, their battle cries melding with the sound of their weapons. We returned fire, our bullets cutting through the air, aiming at the shadowy figures that seemed to be everywhere. In the midst of the firefight, I caught a glimpse of Johann. His face was a mask of determination and fear, a mirror of my own emotions. We fought back to back, covering each other, moving as a single unit in a dance as old as war itself. The battle raged on, time losing its meaning under the relentless exchange of fire. We were fighting for our lives. Each bullet, each maneuver, a desperate bid for survival. At one point, a grenade exploded nearby, the blast knocking me off my feet. I was dazed, my ears ringing, but I managed to get back up, driven by the primal instinct to survive. As suddenly as it had begun, the attack started to wane. The Soviets, having inflicted significant damage, began to withdraw, melting back into the landscape from which they had emerged. We were left with a scene of devastation, smoke rising from smouldering fires, the ground littered with the aftermath of the battle. The cost was high. Many of our comrades lay wounded or worse. The air was thick with the stench of gunpowder and blood. As we tended to the injured and gathered our dead, the reality of what we had just endured began to sink in. Tomorrow we will regroup and assess our situation. But tonight we mourn our losses and tend to our wounds, both physical and mental. Today's battle was a harsh reminder of the war's brutality, a testament to the fragility of life and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. The dawn of July 7th broke with a sombre mood hanging over the camp. The aftermath of yesterday's fierce battle was a grim sight. The area was strewn with the remnants of the fight-shattered equipment, craters left by shell impacts, and the all-too-familiar marks of conflict. We spent the morning in a weary daze, tending to the wounded and collecting the fallen. Johann, who had been a pillar of strength during the battle, now moved silently among the others, his face reflecting the heavy burden of loss. The invincibility of youth, which he had once seemed to possess, was now replaced by a sobering understanding of war's harsh realities. As we worked, the medics were doing everything they could to treat the wounded. Their task was daunting, with limited supplies and under the constant threat of another attack. The cries and moans of the injured were a haunting backdrop to our grim tasks. The loss of some of our comrades hit us hard. Men who had become more than just fellow soldiers, who had become friends, brothers in arms, were now solemn memories. We gathered for a brief impromptu service to honour them. There were no grand speeches, just a few heartfelt words and a moment of silence. In that silence, each of us grappled with our own grief and the stark reminder of our mortality. In the afternoon, we received orders to fortify our position and prepare for possible further engagements. The task was physically demanding, but it also served as a distraction from the emotional toll of the day. Digging trenches, setting up defensive positions. Each of us threw ourselves into the work, perhaps in part to avoid the weight of our thoughts. As the day drew to a close, Johann and I found a moment to talk. We spoke little of the battle, instead focusing on memories of home, clinging to the vestiges of normalcy. In these conversations, we find brief escapes from the relentless grip of war, small oases of peace in a desert of chaos. We brace ourselves for what may come, be it another attack or the continuation of this tense waiting game. The unpredictability of this war is its only constant, but in the midst of this uncertainty, The bonds we've formed here become our stronghold, a source of strength and resilience in the face of adversity. July 8, 1943. The early light of July 8th brought a deceptive calm over our camp. After the frenetic energy of the previous days, this quiet was unsettling, as if the very air we breathed was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to resume. Our morning routine was marked by a mechanical precision, each man carrying out his duties with a stoic resolve. The events of the past few days had left an indelible mark on us, hardening our resolve, but also deepening the shadows in our eyes. Johann seemed particularly introspective, his usual lively banter replaced by a thoughtful silence. During a brief respite, I joined him at the edge of the camp, looking out over the expanse of the Russian plains. The vastness of this land is both awe-inspiring and daunting, a constant reminder of the scale of this conflict and our small part in it. We spoke little, but the silence between us was comfortable, a shared understanding that words were sometimes insufficient to express the complexity of our thoughts and emotions. In these quiet moments, I find a kinship with Johann that goes beyond mere friendship. It's a bond forged in the crucible of shared experiences, both harrowing and mundane. In the afternoon, we received a dispatch from command, a brief respite from active engagement, a chance to regroup and reinforce our position. The news was met with a muted response. Relief, certainly, but also the unspoken knowledge that this was just a temporary lull, a brief pause in the relentless rhythm of war. The rest of the day was spent in fortifying our camp. We reinforced our trenches, checked our supplies, and went over our equipment. These tasks, while mundane, are essential, imbuing us with a sense of purpose and control in a situation where so much is beyond our control. As night falls, the camp settles into a watchful quiet. We take turns on guard duty, vigilant for any signs of enemy movement. The stars above are bright, a stark contrast to the darkness that envelops us. They seem so distant, so detached from the turmoil of our world, and yet they are a comforting reminder of the larger universe to which we belong. Tomorrow we will continue to hold our position, maintaining our readiness for whatever the war brings our way. In the face of uncertainty and danger, we find strength in our routines, in the camaraderie of our unit, and in the quiet moments of reflection that remind us of who we are and what we're fighting for. The morning of July 9th greeted us with a dense fog that had rolled in overnight, blanketing the landscape in a ghostly shroud. The obscured view added a new level of tension to the camp. Visibility was low, making the prospect of an unexpected enemy advance all the more unsettling. Breakfast was a subdued affair. The men ate in silence, their thoughts undoubtedly on the challenges the day might bring. The fog seemed to muffle sound, lending an eerie calm to the morning routine. It was in these quiet moments that the reality of our situation seemed most poignant. A group of men, far from home, waiting in the unknown. Johann and I found ourselves on patrol duty, navigating the perimeters of our camp in the dense fog. Our steps were cautious, the usual sounds of nature absent in this weather-induced silence. We spoke in hushed tones, our conversation revolving around the basic details of our task, but the underlying concern was clear in both our voices. Mid-morning, the fog began to lift, revealing the scarred landscape once more. The normalcy of our surroundings in the daylight was a stark contrast to the morning's ethereal setting. With the clearing fog, a palpable sense of relief swept through the camp. Visibility restored meant a reduced chance of surprise attacks. The rest of the day was spent in continued fortifications and routine maintenance. The mundane tasks, while monotonous, provided a sense of normalcy, a grounding effect in the midst of our unpredictable life at the front. Johann seemed more himself, his earlier introspection replaced by a focused engagement in the task at hand. As evening approached, we received word from command no planned movements or engagements for the next day. This news was met with a mixture of relief and the ever-present undercurrent of tension. Inactivity in war can be as nerve-wracking as combat. Tonight the camp is quiet. The men settled into their routines. I find myself reflecting on the day, on the strange beauty of the morning fog, and the way it transformed the landscape. In these moments of calm, I am reminded of the world beyond war, a world of quiet mornings, of fog rolling over hills, of a life that seems distant now but remains a beacon of hope. We continue our watchful waiting. Each day brings its own challenges, but also moments of unexpected tranquility. In this ever-changing landscape of war, we learn to find solace in the small, unremarkable moments that remind us of our humanity. July 10th, 1943. This day unfolded with an unexpected turn of events that has left the camp in a state of heightened alert and anticipation. The morning started routinely enough, with the usual duties and the unspoken undercurrent of tension that has become our constant companion. However, as midday approached, our scouts reported unusual enemy movements along a sector not far from our position. The information was sparse, but suggested a possible build-up for an offensive. The camp quickly shifted from routine activities to focused preparations. Johann and I, along with a few others, were tasked with a reconnaissance mission to verify the scouts' reports. The responsibility weighed heavily on us as we set out, knowing that the information we gathered could be crucial to our defense. The journey to the reconnaissance point was tense, each of us keenly aware of the potential danger. We moved stealthily, using the terrain to our advantage, acutely conscious of every sound and movement around us. As we neared the area, the signs of enemy presence became increasingly evident: fresh vehicle tracks, discarded supplies, and a general sense that we were not alone. We proceeded with extreme caution, understanding that the line between observer and combatant was perilously thin. It was during this tense exploration that the unexpected happened. We stumbled upon a small, hidden enemy encampment. The surprise was mutual. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as both sides processed the sudden encounter. The ensuing moments were a blur of adrenaline-fueled action. We had to make a split-second decision: engage or retreat. Johann took the lead, signalling for a tactical withdrawal, understanding that engaging would risk a larger conflict we were not prepared for. We retreated successfully, but the encounter was a stark reminder of the fine line we walk every day on the front. The information we gathered was critical, but it came at the cost of heightened risk and tension. Upon our return, the camp was abuzz with activity, preparing for what might come next based on our report. The mood was one of anxious anticipation. We had confirmed the enemy's presence, but their intentions remained unclear. As night falls, we're left in a state of suspense, unsure of what tomorrow might bring. The camp is on high alert, each man bracing himself for the possibility of an imminent battle. In these moments of uncertainty, the true nature of war is revealed: a constant balance between strategy, survival, and the unpredictability of the enemy's next move.